I'll call to order the Tarrant County Election Commission,
And I'll call to order the Tarrant County Elections Board.
and I will confirm that, Hunter, that you received and accepted notice of this meeting by email.
I did.
Okay, and then I will move for the approval of the January 22nd, 2019 Election Commission meeting.
So moved.
I second.
You've got to work on this thing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed?
And for the Elections Board, I have an item for approval of the January 22nd, 2019 minutes.
I move approval.
Got a motion?
Second.
Got a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved.
Okay,
Can you get this one?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for the Elections Board, we have one item specific to the board, which is the approval of the appointment of Cano?
Uh-huh.
Cano, how do we pronounce it?
She says Kano, I say Kano. So.
Kano/Cano, as the alternate judge for the early voting board and the signature verification committee. Just for everyone's, to refresh everyone, this was done earlier in the year, but the person that had been appointed has chosen to retire, so the party is appointing a replacement member for the board. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The appointment is approved.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to call on you to do the report of the on the November 5th elections.
You need this?
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. We have two items on the agenda. As usual, I tried to put it all together in one presentation and just kind of flow through it to walk a little bit, put it all together instead of slicing it down that much. We are going to talk about the November election and about the upcoming primary in March. And to kind of flow through it, I added two things. We're going to talk also about how we got to November and what came out of that election is our set of what we call lessons learned to put into the March election. So how did we get to the November election? I'm going to focus on the 4 months that preceded it, the end of the summer, start of the fall, July, August, September, October. And to start, what I'm going to show you is what would have been our ideal timeline. Okay, and when we do these plans for an election, you start on election day, and there are a series of milestones and events you have to hit. And so we got to build the timeline going backwards, right? So we know early voting starts on a specific day, which in this case was October 21st. We know that we have to be mailing out ballots 45 days before the election, at least to voters overseas. That's by law, you cannot do it any later than that. To do that, we have to public test that data, which with the old system would have been pretty quick. It would have been a kind of a one-day test. We would have liked to do it that day, which means we would have been designing the ballots and loading the data in the system very early in September or late August. And in an ideal world, we would have had every single piece of equipment and software that we had bought from the vendor installed by early to mid-August to then just flow through the process of configuring, setting it up, testing, and being out the door. So what happened? And one thing we knew is, because everything was new, we wanted to start training early September, because we knew we had to retrain every single person, including our own staff and ballot boards and everyone who was going to interact with the new system. So that was a date that it's not part of the usual plan, but we had to put there and say we're going to start way, way earlier than usual. What happened? We awarded the contract to buy voting machines on August 13, which is pretty close to the date we wish we would have had everything already in-house. And then the next day, we were able to formally apply with the Secretary of State to join the countywide polling place program, vote centers. Just for abbreviation, every time you see VC, that's vote centers, the presentation. So we received the first set of equipment on August 23rd. That was the first truck with, I think it was like 200 machines. So that was the first time we actually got to open a box and, the full staff that wasn't part of the bid that saw the demo during those 8 hours that actually touch it and feel it and start turning it on and pulling plugs and figuring out. We did keep the start of the training pretty much where we wanted, early September, and that was the first window I wanted to show you. That meant we had little over 2 weeks from the moment we opened that first box to the moment we were teaching poll workers what they were supposed to do on election day. So that was the first challenge. It was a pretty tough one. We did have a lot of support from the vendor and the staff. And I will say this since I have all of you here. It's not easy to have all of you on the same stage. Kudos to my staff. They are amazing. They were unbelievably committed. When we decided to do the award of the machines, I got them all together and say, okay, so this is ready for agenda for Tuesday. Do you want me to go fight and say, not November, we don't have time? And there was not a single second of hesitation. They were like, nope, we got to do it now. It's not an option. We'll figure it out. So just wanted to say that for all of you. And if you have time to go and give them a pat on the back, I know they would appreciate it. So started training, which meant by the time we got trained and we were feeling comfortable to load the data and do everything in the system, it was September 10. Again, later than what we would have wanted to. And then about a week later, when we were loading the data, we found out about the Watauga ballot. Watauga had 40 propositions, which meant they had 2 pages. So when we bought the system, we thought, what are the odds? You know, you can fit like 50 lines on a single piece of paper. The odds that you have 50, it happened on the first time we had to use this one. Of course. Yeah, I think Murphy does not work in Tarrant County. And then one other thing that was interesting in this process was Bedford had, again, one of those, it's supposed to be very unlikely, but it can happen, situations that allows them to tie into the election even after the date of mailing out the FPCAs. So by law, we're supposed to mail out the ballots 45 days before the election. But Bedford had a specific circumstance, and I apologize, I don't remember the exact details, but it's a certain period of time in which someone resigned too close to the original deadline that allows them to extend the deadline. And that extension goes past the day in which we have to mail out the ballots to voters overseas. So that's another one of those, how do we handle this? Because we're basically going to give some voters a ballot that is not the final ballot. So we reviewed it and we ended up finding a way to mail out the minimum necessary that could be impacted, and we had to delay a little bit the domestic mailings of ballots so that we mailed them based on the final database, which couldn't happen before the 26th when we knew what happened with Bedford. So again, that was another one of those, now we're not going to have 40 days to mail the ballots, we're going to have 30 days to get them out and get them back. And we ended up, because of the Bedford cancellation, doing public tests at the end of September, when again, we would have wished we could have done it some 10 or maybe even 15 days ahead. Then October 1st, we found out that we couldn't do transmission of unofficial results. So in the old system, we used to have what we call analog lines, phone lines, and if you walked into one of those places or our office on election night, you were going to feel like it was the 1990s and you had that computer doing the dial-up sound. That system was in place for years and it was sanctioned by the state, and then the state this year said, no, we can't do that. Nothing that touches any kind of network will be accepted. So we, fortunately, Sheriff Wayburn, big thank you to you too and your staff. All we had to do was have one meeting with the sheriff and done. We had deputies, that's why we had deputies on election night picking up memory sticks and bringing them downtown to our office, because we couldn't do that. And that was kind of a surprise that took basically the whole state by surprise. Some other counties, I know they were up to like 8 a.m. trying to get results through because they were caught off guard by this whole thing. But again, another one of those changes last minute that we had to deal with. And that wasn't the only one. And about a week later, there was a challenge on the way the system numbers the ballots. So the way it works is when the system is certified, the state says, and they gave us the letter that says you can use the system provided that you follow the guidelines and sanctioned procedures. So we asked the state, where are the procedures? And they said, with the vendor. Tell the vendor to tell you what to do. So we did what the vendor told us to do. And then the state said, no, we thought we'd made it clear to them that they can't use their numbering system. Their numbering system is basically when you put a blank page into the dual and it prints your choices, it prints a unique number on the ballot. And what the vendor said is, Our understanding was that that number met all the requirements of the law, and the state was okay with it, and the state said, no, we didn't. We had an objection to that, but it wasn't written anywhere. It was kind of lost, apparently, in translation between the testers and the vendor. Bottom line is that at that point, when we asked the state, what do we do here? The state said you have two choices. You buy numbered paper, which we couldn't, given the timeline. It was 12 days before the start of early voting, or you find a way to put numbers on those ballots. So that's why, if you noticed, on early voting, the ballots had labels with numbers. So we got creative. We figured if we print the numbers on labels and we give them to the poll workers, they label paper on the fly, and now each one of them has a unique number, and you can use it. So those ballots on the back have a sticker with a unique number on it. So it's kind of like serializing on the fly. For election day, we bought hand stamps. It was 330 sites. There was no way we could have printed that many labels and make sure, they were going to get everywhere in time. But we're able to buy numbering stamps. And so these are regular stamps you have, and every time you stamp, they increase by 1 the numbering. And so we set them so they all had different unique numbers, and we put them into supplies. But we didn't get those stamps until the Saturday before the election, the Friday evening. So Saturday before the election, we were handing out supplies and putting those in the bags and figuring all out. So that's how we got to Election Day. Plenty of challenges, plenty of compressed timelines. Not an ideal scenario, but
half of this stuff, I would have been really scared if I'd known half of the stuff.
yeah,
Thank you for
that's.
not letting us know, yeah.
Let's just leave it at that's the tip of the iceberg there. So, and yeah, and again, with something new, with uncertainties. I mean, I know, and we'll talk about training in a minute. We were training ourselves, and after each class, we would go back and say, you know what? Now that I did the first class, maybe we should do this instead of that, and changing on the fly and adapting. But overall, I think it went pretty well. So what ended up happening on the election, including early voting, we had 45 early voting locations, 332 election day locations, countywide, statewide election, right? We ended up using 2,095 poll workers for election day. To train all of these people, we used 5 different locations. We used 3 of them for around a month and a half. The Resource Connection was the longest one. The North Patrol Sheriff's Division office or location they have there, which is also an early voting one, and we had one in the Hewlett Bedford Convention Center. I'm trying to remember if that was Hearst. Say it, the HEB.
Well, you got the only one that wasn't in there.
I know. The HEB Convention Center. And then as we approached the end and we had poll workers asking us, can we get another class, we figured out that since we're already renting the facility that's going to be our new warehouse and it's empty and it's there, we could use it. So we did like 5 classes in there the last weekend, and we also did in our office, also opened up some space and did like another 3 or 4 classes there. So it ended up being 5 places. It was 8 people who were doing trainings. There were a total of 86 classes, about an average of 4 to 5 hours. It's about 430 hours of training that we ran most of these people through. Not all the 2,000 people were trained. We had about a third of them. We had a huge turnaround. I'm guessing it's the natural consequence of the shock of the change in the process and the technology. We had people who would go to training and then say, no, I can't do this, I'm out. So there was a lot of turnaround on that.
Sounds like a jail.
It happened.
So you mean if I come in and just say, no, I'm out, you'll let me go?
So overall, the election, 11.82% turnout. We hadn't had this turnout since 2005, both in numbers and in percentage. Those are the 2 charts. The pink one is the percentage. The green one is the number of ballots cast. When we started planning, I thought, if we make it to 90, I'll be scared. We had 88 just on election day. So I was scared. So one of those lessons learned, ballot paper. We did our best estimation. We doubled November 2017, and we almost tripled it. And it's interesting because the paper comes in packs of 200. So you may think, okay, I had 180,000 sheets. Yeah, but if I give you one, I got to give you 200. So I don't really have 200. I have a certain way of distributing that, which made it complicated. So we're buying a lot of paper for March. Just saying, when you see the bill, don't remember this chart. But it's the way you have to do it, because you can't handle individual sheets. And so the numbers just grow. The good news is, talking about that numbering, the vendors already worked with the state, not for March, hopefully for November next year. The numbering, the automatic number printing will be accepted by the state with this new version we're going to get. And so we get rid of the pre-numbered paper. For March, for May, we're buying pre-numbered paper, serialized already. So we're going to have to buy more because we don't have the option of grabbing blank stock and moving it to another location.
So
Yes, ma'am.
you're buying pre-numbered paper for November?
Serialized for March and May. And depending on whether the vendor certifies the update with the automatic numbering in the summer, we'll buy blank paper for November next year or serialized again.
So is it more expensive to buy serialized?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And you then have to deal with the unused paper, because it's a unique piece of paper that you can use to check and balance and audit your election. So I gave you 100, and I found numbers 3 and 5 in the box. I want to see the rest to know that when it's blank paper, you can just put it back on the shelf for the next election.
That's what we do.
So it ends up having an additional cost of the paper you have to buy next time and the storage you have to use for the unused and so on. So
All
we
gotta be
definitely want.
controlled.
Yes.
It's all gotta be controlled.
So we definitely want to walk away from that, but now at this point it depends on the vendor and the state certifying that upgrade on time.
So Hyder, I have another question. Was that a law that the legislature put in saying, wait a minute, you misunderstood our intention?
No.
It was just a conversation, and then who comes back as a governing body saying, oh, by the way, you can't do that, you need to do it?
The Secretary of State's office.
Okay.
And they were the ones who told us, look, I think there's an opportunity for them to improve the documentation that comes out of the certification, not to say, just follow what the vendor said and you'll be fine, because we follow what the vendor said and we weren't fine. We need to get something in writing from them that says, this is what you're supposed to be
So
doing.
did you submit it back to the Secretary of State, and then they're like, whoa, this is wrong?
No, the whole process started because a voter actually sent a letter to one of the commissioners, and so saying, I have my doubts on the way this system numbers the ballots. And we said, we see your point. It's kind of ambiguous the way it's written in the law, but we just sent it to the state and said, we're ready to reply saying that you certified it and that we're
They
good with
said,
this.
whoa.
And that's when they said, no, you can't do that. Two days of back and forth.
Imagine if nobody brought it to,
We would have run the way we were,
yeah, we would have run.
and we'd be hearing probably about it now.
Yeah.
And what is interesting about it is they never questioned the algorithm that produces the numbers on the papers. It was a back-end report that they wanted that lists all the numbers that were created during the day for auditing purposes. So they were pretty much okay with the numbers that were printing on the ballots.
Right.
It was an additional functionality. They said, we need to have an inventory of it, and the system doesn't generate it.
Got it.
So that's where the whole, the vendor apparently said, but you said the numbers were okay. And the state said, yeah, but I said, you don't have this. And that's where it goes.
Just curious. Thank you.
Finishing up on the serialized paper stock, if it is unopened, I know they come in sealed packages. If it's
Right.
unopened, can we use that stock for later elections, or do you have to hold it in the warehouse like all the pre-printed ones that we've been holding for years past?
So based on how the state responded to this situation, I would say hold it as unused and buy again. Part of what was being questioned in the letter we received was the code says you have to print ballots starting at number 1 up to 1 million consecutive numbers, and then you document, okay, so this poll worker got 1 through 1,000, this one got 1,001 through 2,000. So the question would be probably, okay, so if you take the ones you used and you keep the ones you didn't, and then you just start again first, you don't have a 1 sequential through the rest, and there would be a lot of questions about those gaps and how do you know something's missing, and so to balance this election, you'd have to go back. I would rather probably just, knowing that we have a potential solution coming up, say, just rebuy the whole stock again and keep them all for 2020.
Okay, thank you.
Vote centers, again, we talked about this in court. I think most of you at this point have either talked to me or heard this when we came to court. I think it was a huge success, personally. More than half the people who voted in the election voted at a location that was not their home precinct. I commonly refer to it as voting away from home. We've had a lot of discussions about whether vote centers itself wasn't what increased turnout or not. And what I've told people is, I can't read minds and tell you why someone went to a different place. But what I can tell you is, if those people didn't have a choice to vote at that location, they would have either been sent away or done a provisional that didn't count. And the ones who are sent away, not all of them actually end up going to the other place. So you definitely wouldn't have hit this number of turnout. So even if it wasn't the factor that drove people out to vote, it certainly helped capitalize on, the motivation people had to go out. And I use capitalize to refer to actually allowing them to cast their ballot. When you look at, we did an exercise of saying, in this election precinct, even though people can go anywhere, just to try to compare, what was the location used in 2015 and 2017 and this time around, and how many ballots were cast in that location. So if you look at this first chart, that tells you, compared to 2015, which is the blue one, 25 sites had less people show up. Compared to 2017, 91 of them had less people show up in that location within that precinct. Most of them, and all of them, most of them had an increase, no matter what election you compare it to. More people came to the locations. And of course, there are numbers that are just crazy. I can't find a better word. The ones on the far right that had turnout increases of between 1,000 and 3,000%. Let me make sure this is quiet. One of the things we did, which we would have done without voting equipment and without vote centers anyway, was to retain the early voting locations for Election Day. I'm sure there was a reason to do it in the past, but I don't know which one it was. We would be in a place doing early voting for 2 weeks, then we'd shut down and move to a different place within the same election precinct. So let's close City Hall and let's move to a church, to a school for Election Day. And we said, people are confused. We even used to have what we called voter lookup groups at the early voting location on Election Day with a laptop, and their only job was to say, no, we're not here, but here's where you can go. We did away with those when we got the electronic poll books, because the moment they searched you, the poll book was able to give you directions and print the location, so we dropped that cost. But we kept seeing, what about the places where we're not there? Most of those early voting sites are the ones with increases between the 500 and the 3,000%. Because people just stop by the courthouses, the city halls, the public offices, they just see signs and people and they stop and, oh my God, I can vote here, that's cool. So I think that was one of the biggest factors in generating that increased turnout. And the other chart we've shared a lot, and this was in the infographics and the report we sent to the state to apply for permanent vote center status, was we didn't see a pattern of vote centers helped more one area of the county than the other. We did not. I mean, if you look at it, pretty much they're all 50-50. More or less, 46, 53, 50, 49, but they're all around 50-50. In fact, the whole county global number, which is the one I refer to when I say more people voted away from home, is 50.81. It's just a little over 50.
So let me ask you this, is that typical of when vote centers go in?
I do not know.
I'm just curious.
I don't know. I'll ask other counties.
Yeah,
we have
just say, hey, when you started, did, precinct 2 jump up? I'm just curious. I would guess not, but that's kind of curious.
Yeah. And these are the people, the way I did this chart was people who live in that precinct. I could do the other one, which is what precinct or what locations brought more people in, which we will have to do when we get to 2021 and we have the conversation with the court. Do you want to close certain locations or not? Are there locations that are like bigger magnets of people and ones that have dropped
Well,
or
even
not?
in the 2020 election, you're going to use this to determine where you plant or place more of your machines.
Correct. That's also part of the study we're doing now. And I'll get to that in the lessons learned. Maximize what we call the early voting locations. Yeah.
So are we increasing voting locations in 2020?
No, but definitely adding more equipment in the places that
At
had
the
these
places. Got
huge spikes right here.
Got
So
it. So the lines won't be as long.
exactly. If more people are going to a town hall than a small church, then have more machines at the town hall than a small
More in the
church.
plaza because we were all standing in line.
So that's kind of what happened during that election, early voting, election day included. What was our takeaway from it? Our kind of lessons learned. We're still working on tabulating and putting together all of that. I know that we have what we call an internal issue log. We have 139 items that our staff identified. That includes problems and successes. Problems, this was wrong, we need to fix it. Successes, well, this turned out right. Let's institutionalize it and make it part of a standard process and make sure we do it all the time. We've gotten the feedback from the parties. I even know the Republican Party, when we had the hearing for vote centers, gave a copy to the court of all their, we should be looking at fixing this and doing that and making these changes. And there are two main vendors that we do reviews with. The voting equipment one was yesterday. They were here for 4 hours and we were going through everything we did, and what changes. There are changes we're already putting in the queue for 2015. They're going to try to control the
2015.
Sorry, 20. What am I thinking? I'm thinking about the
You were
version.
so far back, I couldn't figure out whether you were meaning
I think
2025
their
or
next,
2020.
the next version is 2.1.4, and 2.1.5 is the one they were saying for 2021.
Okay.
Yes, that's it. I think that's what I meant. But yeah, we're talking about changes past November 2020 that we're thinking, it would be nice to have this. But again, because the certification process is so long, they want to do the minimum, the numbering and like 2 other things to get it in the queue now, to try to get it done by the summer so that we can have those enhancements available in November. Anything else is going to have to wait for the 2021 cycle. This time I said it right.
So I have a question. How many, we had the vendors with us on election day. Were they just like all hands on deck?
They were here.
They were,
They were here.
Okay.
They had their project manager here. They had
make
both of them.
sure-
The 2 big ones that we have these meetings with. The other ones, the electronic poll books one, we're going to have on January 6th. One of the reasons we're waiting until that day is poll books have to be certified now. That was one of the changes in the state law. The electronic poll books were just something you bought off the shelf and used. Now the state has required for that technology to be certified by the Secretary of State, and that certification has to be obtained by January 1st, this January 1st, 2020. If they don't get certified, we can't use them in March. So they're running through that process, and we're going to have that follow-up meeting with them to get the status on that.
How many
involvement.
different vendors are there for poll books across the state?
I want to say that I know about 3, and if there's a 4th or a 5th out there, I apologize to them for
Has
not knowing them.
anything been certified yet?
Not that I know of. They're all in the process of, they have submitted all their packets, at least the one we use. We know that the update we got is we already gave everything to the state. We already ran through the code review. They do a source code and everything. So they're kind of waiting for a response from the state at this point, from what I understand.
do all the big,
But we'll have more details about after that January 6th meeting.
do all the big counties use poll books now?
If you're a county that uses vote centers, yes. Harris does. I think they make their own. They're the number 4 because they do their own in-house development. Dallas uses the same vendor we do. Travis uses the same vendor we do. Who am I? Bear County.
So they're basically.
They use a
all
different
using
vendor.
Electronic poll books.
Yeah.
Because that's what I hear out on, people don't like those electronic poll books. Our poll workers or, party people, just whoever has to use them, they complain. That is a consistent message I hear. I don't trust those poll books. They don't work. They go down. But everybody's using them.
I
It's
used to
not
hear
just us.
those, but actually, and it's funny because maybe it's, now that you have new machines and you have more doubts on this, now what I'm starting to hear is I actually love the poll books. I'm figuring them out. Now I have these
Got it.
machines to figure out. So I don't know if
At
that's
least
comforting or
everybody's
not,
moving
but
towards-
I guess the focus shifted somewhere.
I've had some people come up to me. It was kind of like Otter said. This year they came up and said, "Boy, we love the poll books."
Hate the voting machine.
But last year it was,
Yeah, I mean, I hear
jury
that.
stuff, because they were just learning how to do it. And again, I've said on election day, your workers were all used to handing out a paper ballot. And this was the first year they've had to deal with a machine, and so my guess, a lot of those folks did the training on the machines and said, I think it's time for me to retire.
How many poll books do we have?
We just put an order for 260 more to go up to 1,060.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
1,000 iPads in the warehouse. They look pretty nice when you walk in. Dallas bought like 4,000 from what I understand.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And it
So-
could be,
Good news, I guess the good thing is we bought it all with what we call Chapter 19 and T71 contract funds. So they really haven't come out of the county's budget. We've been able to buy them,
Good.
That's why we've been doing it batch by batch and not come to court to say we need more money for this, so.
I was
Go
gonna
for
say, on our side, it could be that all my complainers saw the equipment and stepped down. We got very few complaints on election day, very few, and usually I get them, I'm sitting there getting them all day long from people that are out there working. So it could be the people who didn't like the equipment didn't show up, and the people who knew it ran it this time.
That's correct.
Darrell, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, it seemed like the poll books, the two I had at the election site I worked, one would do the change of address and all that necessary, the other one wouldn't. And the programming must have been different in those two. And so, if we had a change of address, then we,
Had to go back on this one. Okay.
You can't reroute them once you've signed them in on one, I don't believe.
No.
But there's, so that was some of the confusion. I heard other people had that same thing, that one poll book did it one way and the other poll
The
book
only
did it
thing I can
another.
think of, but I have to verify with my staff, is there's a question when you log in, says, are you a judge? And that may restrict certain, and to change an address might have been that. So
might be.
I'll check, and if that's the case, that's a perfect thing to highlight in the training, or get rid of the screen. Because we basically tell everyone, answer yes, so you have all the set of functionality, so.
And just worthy of noting is that we transported the memory sticks, the constable's office and us did, but it was treated like a piece of evidence, it was sealed
Oh, yeah.
at the scene, it was carried, it was very carefully handled.
Which is probably why it was the best thing to do to enlist your help, because it was treated that
Yeah,
way.
you have to
You
go
know, it was in a
find
sealed
somebody
bag with a
home
number,
about
and they were
it.
like, look, here's a bag, I'm
Yeah,
not
there was
touching
that
this.
too.
So, Sheriff, with as many vote centers as we had, did you kind of assign deputies certain ones to pick up in a geographic area to cut down on time? Yeah.
That's what we did, and they were running back and forth, and we had two at each or something like that.
2 in each, because we thought it was going to be necessary, but I guess
At each
your guys arrived pretty fast, and by the time they got back, it was like, no, I haven't left.
Lines flashing by me.
But no, it wasn't necessary. Now the good news is, part of the meeting that we had with the vendor yesterday, apparently the state has already agreed to a way to do this without physically transporting it. And basically, it's like having two servers. One reads. There's a process to copy the information without ever touching the internet. So one would go in that unofficial, transmit it to put it on the website. The other one, which has never touched the network or any of the devices, goes into a second server. And what the vendor told us yesterday is we're looking at it, and even if there's added cost, we'll give you the parts you need to do this, because that was our obligation in the contract to make sure that you could do rally stations. So there's a very good chance that we won't do it in March or the
Gotcha.
foreseeable
Yeah,
future.
we're
But
kinda like the Pony Express in November.
Well, and I would like for there to be absolute, and I know that's a tough word to ever use, but I would almost like there to be absolute agreement that we're okay with approaching that way of delivering, because if it means that something goes out into the, internet or anything like that,
so let me
I
explain.
know what you're saying, you're going at it from two different directions, and they come back together and they have to reconcile would be.
No, the opposite. So you used to take one cartridge from the machine, and then in the rally station, plug it into a computer that read it, and our computer called that one and pulled the results. And so what I understand is their motivation for questioning the whole thing was that drive has now touched a computer that has touched the internet. So you've breached the air gap. You're tainted, if you want to call it somehow. So what the vendor proposed to the state was, okay, you have devices that will make an exact copy of a memory device. And they're standalone. You can plug them into the wall. They don't need internet. They just copy this to this. And so you would come in with a machine at the rally station, make a copy of the device, leave the original in the machine, which we would use for the official, and grab the copy and plug it into the one that feeds us through the. So that night we would give unofficial results based on the copy. But then when we get all the machines in, we would reread all the originals and override and say, here's the official that never touched the web. There's a trade-off there we can talk about.
I'll be thinking about it, because I'm gonna be looking at y'all in March and November, kinda like I'm looking at y'all now.
There's a trade-off there.
Maybe others.
One is more work for us. I'll say it like that, honestly. We got to reread all those cartridges when they come in, open all the machines, pull the original drives, and reread everything, in exchange for they're quicker on election night. Because the moment they plug it in, they're basically almost immediately in our office in the website. So I guess the question is, if you didn't feel, if no one here worried about it was too slow to get the results, then maybe we just stick to bringing the one and only device down.
Everyone's results are a lot
So,
quicker.
but you could, your official results could differ from your unofficial results.
I'm going to say no,
Okay.
Shouldn't.
Tell me
No.
why you're gonna say no.
because
if
it's an
that's-
identical copy. You're talking
Okay.
about somebody hacked the unofficial
Yes.
one.
Well, that's the purpose of it though, right?
Right. So you have the original, and then you say, I mean, at
Like
that
I
point, you would
said-
say, so how come that night you told me that Hyder had 100 and Mark had 0, but then Mark has 100 and Hyder has 0? Open the thing and let's see what happened. And so you would have the original and the whole thing.
So why, you just answered, I said, so you could have differences, and you said no, but then you just described it and said you could.
If you have a difference, we
99.
got a problem.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not, I mean, I don't worry about that one. I
Okay.
believe it's secure enough to do it. And again, it's a parallel copy. It's like,
You don't worry about it until there's a worry to worry about it, then you're gonna worry about it a lot.
no, that's the kind of thing where I think it's more
I hear you.
dialogue around it, the theories, theoretically.
Belt and whatever else you wanna put on it.
Yeah.
so we're gonna all knock on wood, because if it ever happens, you know you're gonna have a candidate who, if the results differ, will be
It's-
fighting over it forever.
True, but you know what? It's more likely that someone will lose a ballot box than someone will hack a device of those.
Okay.
And, by the way, election night, yeah, we had an election judge that took a ballot box home and refused to give it to us, and we had to go pick it up in Grand Prairie. That's why we couldn't finish until 12:30. That's more likely to happen.
Your
Yes.
gal, or somebody, one of your, it was
So-
either your people or the
So let me
constable.
tell you the whole story. So they're supposed to come back to our office at the end of the night and say, here's the poll books, here's the paper ballots, and here's the scanner that has a device that read those. So you have the electronic, and if something's wrong, you can read those. When he showed up, the story I have from both ends is, basically he didn't have the ballot box, he didn't have the electronic poll books, the scanner. He didn't have the scanner, and he was told, you need to go get that and come back. Now, this is a poll worker that lives in Grand Prairie and was working in River Oaks.
Okay.
He was covering in, So his version is we were rude. Our version is he didn't know what we were saying. Bottom line, he got in his car, he left, and then he called us and said, I'm not bringing anything. You can go pick up your scanner, or I can bring it to you tomorrow at 8 a.m. when I wake up. That was probably 10:30 or something. So we debated for a while. We talked to your sergeant who was there, said, is there anything we can do? We felt that we were going to open a can of worms. We talked to River Oaks police, we talked to Grand Prairie police, and we sent 2 people out. One of them went to the library. The police were kind enough to open it for us. Your sergeant mediated and helped us get access to a lot of that. Thank you for that, double. And the other thing we did was contact Grand Prairie police and tell them, would you please meet our staffer at this address so that when he knocks on this person's door, there's police there just for his safety. Poll worker was apparently very polite, said, yep, sure, here are your ballots, here are your poll books, have a good night. That was around midnight. So when our staffer came back with the ballot box and the thing, and the scanner came back from the library, that's when we were able to finally read in the last set of results and tell the state, we're finally done for the night. That's more likely to happen.
So,
That's why I said no initially. And I'm not trying to, I'm just saying,
so when he was at the rally station, he didn't, you guys told him to take everything with him back and then go get the.
he has to drop everything off. And maybe that's part of the review we're doing is saying, could we have just held what he had and sent him back?
'Cause
He
I
would have
know-
still gone home, but we would have had the ballots.
I understand there were 3 or 4 that forgot to bring the scanner in.
Scanner. That was what I heard.
And
the
they
most
all
was
went
they
back and
forgot
get
the
it. That's the
scanner.
process.
Yeah, and a lot of them had trouble, and this was a brand-new judge that had not probably been trained on the administrative portion of it, and so he didn't
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
how critical this was, so.
Yeah, no, and again,
And
the
part
feedback
of
I got
thing with
was he
training-
was very polite when our staffer showed there. He was very cooperative, but it was just,
We don't get it.
if you're going to be rude to me, which is his side of the story, and I'm not dismissing it, then I'm going to be rude to you, and I'm not coming back till tomorrow
So
at
the
8.
rally station said, I can't accept anything unless, okay.
And part of the other thing we keep in mind, I'll just say Sharon Wilson's husband's a judge, and he said he went through training 3 times so that he'd be for sure in getting it. Some of these folks, your previous map, some of those folks
Never
did
went to
training
training.
6 weeks before the election.
Forgot.
Hell, I can't remember what I did last night, let alone 6 weeks ago last night.
Well, I know 3 people came through our headquarters for additional training, and they did not know that they had to pick up their supplies before the election. They thought everything was delivered, so.
It's a lot, it's a
You
lot.
know, so
I'm
those
not-
3 I know went and picked up their stuff, but how many others didn't show up by the deadline?
Which happens. And that's why the Monday before the election, we're usually till very late there just making calls. And hey, we even have people, you live close to my house, I'll drop them off in your place just to finish the last bag and so on.
Moving along.
Yeah, we get off of that story.
So, but some of these things have already in progress. We just want to make sure that we document it because I know that when we come in March, it's not going to be any longer. So what are you planning on doing? But what did you do to get ready for March? So we'll share that documentation and the whole. Here's what we learned. Here's what was in process. Here's what was deferred, or what could it be done. But there are 2 basic points where we're going to focus on. I would say the big strategical changes that we're going to make. One has to do with locations, and the other one with training. And most of these items that the parties and everyone have given us fit in some of these 2 categories, at least the most important ones. So when it comes to locations, definitely keep the early voting sites policy. Stay there. Those are magnets for voters, and they draw huge numbers of voters to vote. Work with the entities and always request the big rooms. So what we've seen is that in some elections we're told, you don't need the ballroom, you can use the little foyer in the school. You don't need the gym, you can use we want the big room because we want to maximize the number of pieces of equipment we can put in there and get people used to. You go to City Hall, there's like 30 machines. It's a piece of cake. And well, it depends. Sometimes they use the little kitchen on the side and then they can only fit 12 there. So working with them to make sure we get, consistent access to those rooms is going to be important. And keep simplifying the list of sites. Big thank you to the 2 parties. In planning the March election, we've already done some of that. We've seen that, okay, so in this precinct we use this site for the municipals, or we don't use it in the municipals, we use this one for November, and you have been using this one. Is it possible to do this so that people always know that? And they've said yes, and we've moved a few already in planning March. So we're going towards that strategy of if you identify a site, it's very likely always going to be there no matter what the kind of election. Again, making it easier for people to find out where to go, kind of in line with the first one. And then on training, we have, of course, lots of detailed changes to make, but I think number 1, of course, reviewing the training materials, making it clearer, whether it's separating them or translating them or, whatever form it is. Yeah. No, and I'm not saying, and I want to say this too. I think our trainers and my staff did a heck of a job, considering they basically had 14 days to figure this out and be the experts to train someone else. But now we go back and say, okay, from what we learned, how do we make it even easier, even simpler to digest? One point that was mentioned repeatedly in all the feedback received, there we go, was to make videos. We already have the scripts, and turns out that it's a lot easier than I thought. I thought it was going to be, we got to find the money, we got to make a project. County has a graphics department that has the resources and has said, we'll go and make them for you in 1 day, 0 cost. So the scripts are there. I was just reviewing them today. I think Troy even set a date already to start filming the videos. So that resource will be available. Once they exist, put them on the cloud, put them on apps, put them everywhere is easier.
When you get the training materials prepared and you're about to go to graphics, I want them to go to these 2 folks right here.
Okay.
For them to read through, or for them to get 2 or 3 or your more sage election judges to read through and make any suggestions that need to be made.
Yep. Yeah, and definitely one thing that we also were asked a lot was to have that single poll worker, only one handbook. And I told this to someone already, and it is the actual truth. We just ran out of time. And so they had 2 manuals, the poll book one and the machines one. So we just didn't have time to have it in time to training. We're working towards having those. Here's a single book for everything. And the other one, shorten the calendar. That one has been a challenge. Because basically if you take 6 weeks, what we did in 6 weeks of training, and condense it down to 2, so nobody goes too early to training, It means that now you need probably double the trainers. You don't do 3 classes in 3 places a day. I'm going to need 6, 7 locations, or find a way to do 2 classes in one day. We're also talking about, I really wanted to have an all-in-one class. And when they walked into the classroom, there was a cabinet the way you found it on the site on election day, and it was, okay, 6 a.m., break the seal, and let's go, and step by step. And at the end of the class, they packed everything the way they were supposed to return it to us. That class was taking over 4 hours to do. And then with the turnaround time to unpack that and repack it as a brand new kit to start the next class, it was impossible to do back-to-back classes in one location. So that's a challenge for us to figure out, how do we do that without asking people to come to training at 6 a.m. or stay until midnight. We'll figure it out. But some of the poll workers said, look, I like the idea the first time to do the all-in-one, but we should also have the option to break it down and say, I only want a refresher on equipment, so give me a little 45, 1 hour minute class, just on equipment instead of the whole thing again. So we're looking at that to see how we can fit all of that into, here's a training for March, and here's how it's going to go for March. Yeah, that's the compressed version of what came out of there from a strategic point of view. Again, I don't want to go into a list of 500 items and sometimes little changes. So how are we going into March? What's it looking like right now? 48 early voting potential locations, and there's an asterisk right there next to that. It says 8 of those on the list are the college campuses that we have to bring the Commissioner's Court to talk about. Early voting is run by the county, and election day, the parties choose. So they've chosen their sites, they've chosen their locations, everything. What I'm working on right now to bring the court, probably in January, is, okay, choice 1. We use all the 8 campuses that can no longer be temporary permanently, and it costs this much, and I have or don't have the money for that. And if I have it, it's left over from other categories, and I'm going to need you to let me move it around. And if I don't, I need the money. Choice 2, we do 40. We don't do college campuses because temporaries are not allowed. Obviously, that would fit the budget because it wasn't planned for. Choice 3 is that we find, or 3 and all its variations, I tell the court, what if instead of 8 we do these 7? What if we do these 6? And so bring those to the court to figure out, here's a final list of early voting locations and what the implications are in terms of cost. And basically cost is the issue there. Last I checked, there were 196 election day sites. One more, one less could change between now and then as we review availability and keep going through the discussions, but it's going to be around that.
And this is the, I want to go back, this is the primary.
Primary, March, correct. Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's where we are. So we're putting together that list of locations, numbers of equipment, shooting out the last purchase orders of additional poll books, voting machines, and things like that we need. And that leads me to the last open item we have. We have 2 choices here that we need to figure out so I can decide what to do here.
Before we go,
Yes, sir.
Let me ask one question back to the 2 of y'all to think about or to come back and give us a response at the Commissioner's Court. Campus voting. Is that as important to you in the primaries as it is in the general? I don't need an answer today. I'm just saying, think of it in that perspective and determine whether or not that means something one way or another, because, you know, we've got a lot of discussion around the campus voting. And we did the TCC campuses because TCC paid for them. But other than that, we did no campus voting in this off-cycle election that we just had. Sorry.
So we'll answer. The other thing I wanted to tell you, at one point, we've had as many as 211 voting sites, and we've gotten it down to 196 working together. So we've saved some money there because we're down to 196.
And so as I understand it, are you going to talk some more about?
No, I was just going to clarify something there, but that is paid for by the state. That's not money that is saved from my budget, which I could read. So just to make sure that while the overall, if you want to look at it, cost of the election may be less because there were less sites, I still have the same situation to deal with, which is I have this much money that I thought of last year for early voting this year. So
But is that for the November or for the primary?
for the primary.
Okay. The other question is there, as I understand it, and I might be fixing to open a can of worms, but because the machines are now capable of printing out where, whatever ballot you are, depending upon where you are, it can also print out whatever ballot you're looking for based upon what party you are.
Right.
And so you could have the same machine that if you were both voting in the same location, I see that grin beginning to form, you could vote, same location, same machine, there would be a place to go if you were putting in there might be a counter for the Republican and there might be a counter for the Democrat.
Well, you have to have that.
Definitely, yeah. But I mean, I don't know where, it sounds like y'all were, go ahead.
That's exactly where I was going to go into.
That's
the
what
last.
I was asking, I didn't ask it quick, quietly.
Yeah, no,
enough.
my bad.
Before you get too far,
Yes, sir.
Lena,
Yeah, ma'am.
I need to ask, you've talked about your training and embracing more training and taking those into new levels. I think it's an important step, and I used my time during the week after the past election as an election commission member, polling as many election judges as I could to find out what were the issues that you had. And I think that it would behoove you to have a debrief of the election judges, if not within a few days of the election, because I know it's still election time and y'all are still busy, but even within a week, because you need to debrief with these election judges, because no one understands the problems that they themselves had with that particular location or that particular machine better than them. Because I was chatting with some and they said, oh, we had no problems whatsoever. Some were saying we had to post someone by the door to make sure that the piece of paper didn't walk out the door. Some were saying, oh, in our location, it was the handicap accessible
Device.
unit that was not functioning properly, but the rest of them were just fine. So I think it's important moving forward, irregardless of what election that we're speaking about, that elections have a debrief. And I don't know whether you can get everyone together, at your place, or we have party debriefings and collectively bring that information together to present to Hyder as well. We could also do that. But I think that it's important to debrief that, and they have exact numbers of machines, which one had roller issues, that type of thing. Some of the election judges did say, I completely forgot to bring the scanner, and that was all on me because they told me to do it, and I just forgot because it's a new system.
Yeah.
So they recognize that, and they're saying that, but in them saying, yeah, that was my bad, I also think that we owe them a debrief for them to bring to you issues moving forward, whether we're talking about a March or a May or a November ballot. I think it would be important to do that, especially because we have the new equipment. Once we've had it for a while, those debriefs are going to be less frequent probably, and the training is going to be more important as we have new folks come in that we're training.
No, I think I agree with you 100%. We've done it both ways that you mentioned, actually. Last year we did one, I called it a focus group. Okay. And I literally we did it 2 days, one day early voting clerks and one day election day judges. We brought, I think it was 10 and 10. And we put them in an office with a webcam, and my staff was in a separate room. It's kind of like a focus group. You can't sit there and cut them off in a conversation to defend your idea. We're here to listen to them, right? So to the point that I want you in a separate room, listening, but unable to intervene and cut them off. That was fun. It worked. We got a ton of feedback. We did everything we could. And some of the things that we got from them were like, we wish we could do something, but since we're getting new equipment, out of the way. We'll deal with it with the new equipment. So this year, we did it the other way, the parties. We were talking about it, and the party said, we'll get you the feedback, and that was what we got from both of them. Here's everything that our judges said. In the case of the Republican Party, they invited me one evening, and I went there, and it was kind of like a focus group. Just, okay, I read what you sent, but, there's a little bit of venting too. But let it out. But, yeah, we definitely want to do that. We haven't done it every election, which is probably, with 2,000 people, you can pick 10 random and not repeat someone for 20 years, I guess, right? 200 years. There you go. So more often, definitely. Yeah.
I think you're gonna open up a whole can, so I
Oh,
wanted to
yeah.
say that
Oh, yeah.
before you open this one.
Okay, so last item that we need to decide. So the way we're presenting the parties with a choice to make here between whether we share or not the duos. Okay, so choice one is what we call a full split, and choice two is what we call shared duos. Full split is what we do right now. If you go into a room right now or into a location, you would have almost two separate locations contained in one. So you have one place where the Republicans check in, then they would move on to the Republican controller that would issue an access code, and you can use one of the Republican duos to cast a Republican ballot and then put it in the Republican scanner. And the same thing with the Democratic Party. By the way, I took the logos from your websites just to make sure I got the right ones, the exact ones. Same thing, you would check in the iPads of the Democratic Party, go to the controller, and so on, and put the ballot only in the scanners. And the scanners would kick out the ballots that are not for the right party. So there's no chance that, I'm missing one, maybe it's in that box. Well, scanners are programmed for that. The reason this whole discussion started is because when I was doing the numbers for the March primary, we started realizing immediately that you can have situations like this. So this is an example of a location where you had, last time, which was not vote centers, and that's a huge variable, say 1,000 Republicans and 100 Democrats vote. And so the question is, how many machines do we give you? So I could do this and say, based on historical turnout, this should be enough for the 1,000 people that showed up last time and the 100 people that showed up last time. But there are two issues there. One is, we're vote centers, so now people can go anywhere. So maybe the 100 Republicans say, the Democrats say, well, you know what, I heard that it's hardly a line over there, so I'm going to go there. And now instead of 100, I have 500. 3 machines are not enough for that.
Yep.
And so what I want to avoid desperately is being looked at and said, did you disenfranchise? And not you, in general terms, did you disenfranchise us because you knew we were coming here, you gave us list of the other party? It could be the other way around. I could give an aside. There are sites where you have 1,000 Democrats and 100 Republicans. And so that's when this whole thing sparked, and we said, how can we do this? And so we came up with choice two, which before I say anything, I want to say it very clear. It's not a joint primary. What we would do is have separate check-in stations. Republicans check in here, Democrats check in here, but now you have a pool of dual machines. So every dual machine is able to generate whatever ballot you checked in, so you can walk from either one of the check-in stations to this, do your ballot, and then you have to still go put it in your party's scanner to get it counted. And so what that would do is, instead of having to send, what's this, 9 machines here, I can do 10, but anybody who walks in has the same wait time. No one is held because there were too many of this. Or what's worse, you're in a line and you're looking around and you're seeing 4 machines and not a single person voting there, and you're like, why do we have to be in line when we could be doing that? What I tell people is this would be sort of like you go to the airport and it says, go to the check-in kiosk of your airline, and if there's too many people, too bad you're flying in the busiest one, there's no one there. This one is basically you could use any terminal, but make sure you board your plane on your gate or you're going to end up in the wrong destination, right? Well, you're going to be kicked out, but you get the point. So that's where we go. The numbers I've run and that I've shared with the 2 party chairs for this show that it would be an increased cost for the Democratic Party, because now we're talking about evening out numbers of poll workers and things where they would have had less, now they'll have more because they will have access to more resources, I guess could be the summarized version. But the overall cost of the election goes down. So the Democrats would pay more, Republicans would pay a little less. The overall cost is less on this scheme than on this layout. But I do think that this one does benefit people a lot more and makes it a lot more even across the board. Walk in and say, you gotta wait for your machine to be available. If one's available, cast your ballot and done. And that's the last point that I wanted to raise to see if we want to have a discussion here or table it for later, but not too later because January is right around the corner.
The only problem I have with that is the reliability of the controller and the daisy chain. Because at my left site, the daisy chain between the first duo and the second went down, and that means the rest of them went down beyond that point. So I had to scramble to get the new cord plugged in there, and then, but the duo, the controller itself, can you run two off of that, 2 branches?
Yeah, it has 2 ports in the back. You could do it halfway. Probably be a little more complicated because people would have to walk over the cable to get to them, but they can be taped and secured. One of the things we did talk with the vendor about, they have confirmed that a batch of those daisy chain cables was defective. And it was defective in the cover of the plug in a way in which makes it not be able to fully be inserted, which means it was kind of loose. So we're going through an inspection of all those cables to send all of the defective ones back and get all brand new, and so we should mitigate that problem. And on top of that, in training, I'm going to make sure that we tell people if it happens, pull the last one, use it here, and keep going. So you don't kill the full chain, you kill the last machine only. That's a training thing with troubleshooting we have to have. But yeah, that's been identified.
Do you have an estimated cost for the Democratic Party if you went to this model?
I do, but I don't recall it. Do you remember the numbers I
So you
sent?
have the number?
Yeah, but, I will just tell you, I mean, we're gonna have to table it, because I met with my CEC and my leadership team, and they are not interested in shared duos. So, and I've already,
Yeah.
communicated that to Hyder. I mean, I've met with them twice now, and so,
I almost concur with that, even though that y'all like the money saving part of it, but quite frankly, is this is a new system. Separate, safe, and then maybe at a later time look at duos. But I think right now it's a new system. That's kind of my thought is, hey, let's make sure the wheels are.
Yeah.
And I hear, and I mean, I guess the only thing I would comment back on is I didn't hear any complaints that said I came up, I gave you the right precinct card and you gave me the wrong ballot. And that's what you're basically saying is that somebody's gonna walk up, I think that's what you're saying, they're gonna register as a Democrat, they're gonna walk up to the machine and the Republican deal's gonna come up.
but I think, and see, I'm with the sheriff on this, I think we just rolled out this new equipment. I love it, okay, I love vote centers, but you also have people that did not vote in November who gonna be voting for the first time in March. Why would we make it convoluted that we open the door for that, for people saying I got the wrong ballot? I think we have to get the equipment rolled out where people are comfortable with the equipment, and then theoretically you could talk to them about that.
And again, I share Hyder's concern. The only concern I have is that there's gonna be a place that historically there's been a large Republican turnout, and we're gonna put lesser machines. And it's gonna appear as though we have disenfranchised some of the Democratic votes in that deal. And again, and I know I know you've tried, but I mean, you're gonna look at that ballot and it's gonna be pretty obvious from the first place you're gonna be voting whether you got the wrong or right ballot. And if you've got the wrong one, then I'm assuming what you do is you raise your hand and say,
Spoil
I got the wrong ballot, spoil it.
Yeah, and I mean,
But, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I guess I would just ask, cause does each machine cost us?
the duos, 3,000, 3,200, 3,000 plus.
So I don't wanna go out and buy just a whole lot more machines for that, but, I mean, and I'm not sure we would, so that's the problem. We have about 2,000 machines right now.
3,000 duos.
3,000 machines.
Sorry,
Duos.
it's just, they're different kinds, but yeah, I'm assuming we're talking about the duos, the terminals, right? 3,000, yes.
3,000.
When, for the 2020 November election, isn't there gonna be sites where you want 2 controllers anyway?
Yep,
So,
yeah.
we're,
The early voting sites have more than one
I
string.
mean, so we have 196 for our primary, but we're gonna go to 328 or something for the general election, so it seems like we ought to have those extra 100 controllers anyway.
We bought those. The controllers are not the issue per se.
Okay.
It's just that I feel that, one, we can do this with what we have right now, and so where you have less, you have less, where you have more, you have more.
Yeah.
And both parties don't get the same thing in the same site. We can do that with what we have right now. We pretty much don't have to buy any duos, if I recall well.
But if
We-
one controller goes down in this system, you could still perhaps get an agreement to use these duos for that ballot. Those duos would still pull up a Republican or Democrat ballot regardless.
I can do that and leave it procedural, go to that one, or I can end the programming restricted and say you will.
Normally, if both of them are working great, you would do the separate lines.
Right.
But if you had one go down, or you had cables go down on one, and with a mutual agreement, we could say, okay.
In case of emergency, use the other
You
ones.
can check in on that controller and vote, but be sure to scan in this one. But
Yep. Yeah, and if you don't, it'll kick you out and you go you gotta go to the other one. We can do that, and one of the things we've talked about is we are reviewing that check and balance procedure of the numbers, because we had a lot of discussion with some of the clerks in early voting trying to balance the numbers on the controller to the ballot, and I'm like, code's expired, the person's spoiled. Ultimately, what you want to know is the two tips of the line, the start point, the end point. I checked in 5 people. I have 5 ballots in the scanner. In the middle, just about anything can happen. People get a code, they spoil it, they walk out, they do 5-5. You have nothing lost. Yes, ma'am.
So I absolutely hear what y'all are saying, and I agree with everybody. And I commend you for trying to get in front of it by saying the last thing we need is the optics of we are in a site where people are saying, wow, there's only 3 machines here, and here we are. You got 15 Republican machines, and now we're 3 at a vote center. What is that about? So I commend you for trying to get in front of the optics. That's probably going to happen. The only thing I worry about, if we do that where you can say, the controller can say, you go here, you go there, now we have a line of voters that perhaps may be Republican, and they're thinking, I've got all these people here, you've got 15 Democratic machines, turn it on. And now you've got somebody trying to make a decision, really kind of an authoritative, I'm not going to turn it on. I mean, you see what I'm saying? It's pretty gray that's my concern when you say, and if it's down, that's one thing. But what if a line of voters said, well, can we vote over there? Well, if the machine's broke, you could vote over there. Well, just turn them on and let me get over there. That's my only concern about that. But I commend you for trying to get in front of the optics.
And my other thing, and I know, and I'm probably hurting myself, but I know when I talk to my leadership team, I think in things like this, we almost have to make it through the first one. And then they come back and say, Deborah, we had X amount of people and we only had 3 machines. And I'll say, okay, here are the numbers. We had a chance to do this. You all voted to do that. And so I think we have to live through one of them to see. And I know where you want to go. I'm just
going to sit down with the editorial board before we ever go into this thing.
I agree.
Because they're the ones that are going to just
Light us up.
grill us.
To use your term, at least they'll be equally hated, because we have that situation on both sides, right? You have ones where you have.
I think what we'll find is in those early voting locations, those places where we just anticipate there are going to be a whole lot of people show up.
Half and half.
In those, we do half and half.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that we are looking at also is in the early voting sites, the state's not really convinced, but they didn't really have an argument to say no either. So I think it's more of us feeling comfortable with it is the equipment stays there. We just swap out the scanner to count election day ballots and the controller, but everything's already there. The place is already set up. It's big, it's maximized, and most of them are going to have 2 lines already of everything. So it's pretty quick to set up.
And go ahead.
No, I was going to say, speaking of setup, it's not got to do with this, but one of the issues we had that's really important to go back on is setup time. Setup is complicated and is where we need more help. And we were in a crunch, and do we put 12 more people per site to help set up, but then at 9 a.m. you don't need them. And when I talked to Mary Louise, the county clerk, she was suggesting that why not use, or provide some help from employees from her department and see if we can talk about getting help from county employees, on election day. I think that's a great idea.
Would be willing to volunteer.
But I didn't want to forget to mention that because I think it's a great idea we should follow up on, and I haven't followed up on it with you.
And again, in this November election, we put out about 2,000 machines. 17 something or.
Yeah.
And we're going to be putting out, you're going to keep some back in reserve, I'm assuming, just to go out where we get inundated someplace on election day. But we're going to have close to, if we've got 3,000 machines, we're going to probably have close to 2,700 out.
27 something.
And so.
What if, and just to add to the fire of if we kept separate is here we go, add bureaucracy. we put a notice on the door when you walked in, notice to voters, to give cover fire for the people that's working there and everybody else's. Both the Republican and Democratic Party have agreed to the number of machines on this site. Thank you. I just know it right up front.
There's nothing that says we can't do it. I guess that would be my answer right now.
I'm just trying to take some
Yeah, 'cause
fire.
I mean, the perception of voting centers, to me, I get to walk in, even if it's a Republican or Democrat, I'm personally gonna expect same numbers. I really am. It's a voting center.
And in some places, we're working through the details of each one of these 196 locations. You have a school gym where you can look, it looks like a big room like this with, you're on one side, you're on one side. In some places, it's two rooms. They're physically separated. You can't see one from the other. Go in the first door, go in the second door. But still,
I hear what everybody's saying. My tendency right now is to lean to the wishes of the parties. But, I would ask that you, one more time, be sure they understand the possibilities. And then we may all go down hand in hand to the editorial board of the paper saying, yeah, we realize this, but don't accuse us of trying to disenfranchise Bud.
So, I have when do you need to know? My next CEC meeting is January the 4th.
Ours is the 9th.
Okay.
Well, they're not gonna get it past the court.
no, does it have to go to court? No, it's their layout, and basically the contract, I think, the only thing I would say, if we chose to go this way, I would like the contract to say that, that you agree that the availability of equipment is based on historical turnout, or something like
But
that.
if
Basically a
they-
disclaimer saying
When is your deadline, though? When do you need?
I think we can wait for that day for the 4th,
Okay.
because
So
this
through the-
condenses equipment and actually,
Yours is the 9th?
His is the 9th. Why don't we make it January the Tuesday is the 7th, the 9th is a Thursday, so we could either make it,
Friday the 10th.
Friday the 10th or Monday the 13th.
Friday the 10th.
Friday the
is an
10th.
Elective, tentative meeting at 2,
Friday the 10th?
yes.
That'll be real good. Friday the 10th, we've got a tentative election.
we meet again here
We're
for
meeting
this.
again here,
Okay.
so that'll be
So
great.
that'll work.
Love it.
And I'll put it
Yeah.
on my agenda for the 4th, okay?
Okay.
And I'll probably invite someone from your office to come and help us. walk
Yeah,
through it
absolutely.
again,
I'll be
okay?
glad to go myself if we
Okay.
have to, or Troy.
But right now, there's 3,000 machines for 196 locations.
Correct. Yeah, including spares and, yeah. It's a little less than that because some get frozen after early voting and training, but basically, yes.
Ian?
Is the option all or nothing on the duos, or can they pick like one location, do a pilot project on the shared duos at like one site that they might agree to, or is that just not feasible for y'all?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to check with the vendor if the programming and the system says, here you have both, here you don't, or something like that. Yeah.
It's a good
Yeah,
idea.
because as sure
Oh,
as
that's
we
a
do
good-
that, one of those machines will end up at the wrong place.
Well, that's 15
okay.
Good idea.
machines. That's roughly 15 machines at each location.
Say 12 take off. But yeah, some of them need 8. Now you have 16 and so on.
But again, that's an expense to them.
We need 2 controllers for that.
I mean, if we need more ultimately and we run out of machines, you can lease them from the vendor, and
You said
We
you
can-
had 600 controllers?
we ordered originally 400, then we bought 100, and we just placed an order for, I don't remember the last number, 60 or 66?
And they'll be
We have
here
over
by,
500.
so you'll be around 550 by the time
Yeah.
primaries get here.
Controllers, I'm not worried about that. And honestly, might be a little tight right now. We could probably buy another 70 duos as a safety net, but I think we have enough. I'm worried about like the ballot paper. I had enough paper, but I was sweating it off between 5 and 7 on election day, because now you have 180 sheets stuck in a place in an open packet and you can't get access to them, so it doesn't matter that you have them. That's my fear with this.
That's what keeps you up at night.
Not really, but
I mean, really?
on the weekdays.
Well, let's just, let me put it this way. We ain't gonna run out of ballots
No.
at primary or in November.
No, I already went through that one, not 2 times. Now I hope I don't run out of
We
duels.
put a little bit of pressure on you is that do it separately for the primary and then put them together for the runoff. No, I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing.
Now, the runoffs are kind of a strange.
Think about that.
thing.
Let me actually,
Yes,
hey, if it gets us one step closer, we'll take it.
All right. Do we have any other questions about this? That is all for the, election board. The commission, I don't know whether or not we need an election commission. The only thing that the commission does is the evaluation of Hyder. So if y'all want to briefly adjourn and go back there, and if you want to say anything, you can say anything, and otherwise, y'all can go ahead and, why don't you adjourn
The
your
board.
election board?
I can do it from here, right?
Yes.
Do I have a motion to adjourn the elections board meeting?
so moved.
So moved, yeah. Second.
And all in favor? All in favor? Opposed?
Okay,
This
then,
meeting's adjourned.
I
Election
will
board.
now recess our election commission, board meeting to move to close to discuss items exempt under section 551.07.
Do I have to wait here?
And that
You don't have
includes,
to.
Okay, just,
But if we fire you, we'll let you know.
I was gonna
I'm
say,
sure I'll
you
find
know,
out.
we're reviewing you,
and
so.
that includes everybody but me.
I know two people, the silver bro.
That is correct.
Yeah, that's
That's right. Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
Share duo.
Do what's that?
No, I was telling, we have a husband and wife team. She's a Democrat, he's a
I hope she's still back there.
Natalie?
No, Megan, is she still?
Yeah, she's back there.
Okay. Wave at us, Megan. Okay.
Yes, she's.
There we go. Thank you, Megan. Having returned from our closed session, we'll now address the following matters. Ida, we appreciate the job you've done. I think it went well. I mean, Mary Louise, did you anything you wanted to say some stuff?
Hyder, I just want to say thank you. You did a tremendous job pulling this together when the Commissioner Court finally made the decision to move us to vote centers and give you those machines. I know you were under a lot of stress. I commend your team. You kept a cool head. You were in the media, constant, and you were just a consummate professional. So you represented Tarrant County well, and thank you for the job you did.
thank you. Appreciate that.
Anybody else?
agreed.
I do.
A lot of them went very well.
I appreciate that you are so willing to listen to the thoughts and concerns and ultimately take it in and understand it in your world, because we don't live in your world, but you get to translate it in your head, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
All right. There being no further business, we're adjourned.